Welcome back to Golden Rule Radio, your weekly recap of the precious metals markets and the news that moves the markets. And welcome to 2023. And as we're looking forward on the heels of a very significant gold rise, amidst, of course, also some concerns going forward through 2023, we'll certainly be here every week to help navigate some of the waters, depending on what happens in the markets and the U.S. dollar. So to start this year off, let's bring in some sage wisdom from Rob, one of our regulars on the show here. So Rob, thanks for joining me. And what do you see going forward in 2023 in precious metals, in markets, and the dollar? Where's your head at?
Over the last 2 years, we had expected a strong move for the metals, and we did see that at the beginning of last year, where we had gold hitting the highest market it ever hit in the midst of the Ukraine invasion.
Right.
And then, of course, it gave it all back, and we ended the year flat. But here we are starting the new year of 2023, and we're up. How much are we up so far this year?
Oh, we're up about $30 or so just in the last couple days, but even better than that, we're up 250 since we hit that bottom you just mentioned back in September and October.
Yeah.
So I think the word of the year is probably volatility. We saw significant volatility in all markets last year, and I don't really see any reason for that to change.
I don't either, and I do see 2023 as being very unstable in the financial world and in the global scene. We don't know where it's all going to end. In Ukraine, thankfully, Europe is having a fairly mild winter right now because it was looking very serious a few months ago going into a harsh winter with the cost of electricity and heating oil and etc. So far, things seem to be starting okay, except here in the U.S., prices are higher. I know they're not really thrilled with Christmas shopping. You know, it was only
up. Tori
8.
brought that up last week. What was it? Up 8% year to year, but then that doesn't factor in the inflation and the massive increase in the U.S. dollar over that same period of time. So just buying the same or slightly less stuff for more money, but it looks like a win on paper. So
yeah, that's all
good
that's
enough
important.
for the numbers.
Yeah.
So yes, going forward, short term, like you asked, and we're looking at here, gold is up slightly here on the beginning of the year, $25-$30. I would argue it is coming into its first kind of range here in the mid to high 1800s, where we should see a little bit of congestion, let's call it, possibly pull back at that range. But given the nature of where, say, our expectation for the interest rate levels are going to go, and Jerome Powell and the FOMC monthly meetings coming out of the Fed, I think it's completely reasonable and frankly quite impressive that gold, despite its volatility last year, managed to stay within a reasonable price range, which when you factor in what the dollar went up is a pretty significant win.
Yeah, gold is holding its ground, and that's what we have always told people. I've had a lot of clients say, why isn't it going up with inflation? It's a store of value. It holds its ground. And that's exactly what it did. I look for gold to approach the highs from last spring and probably move beyond. I would not be shocked to see $2,500 gold at some point this year.
I wouldn't either. I think that's a completely reasonable expectation coming off the almost $2,100 high last year.
Yeah.
But speaking of coming 2023, I want to get back to what you mentioned a second ago, and that's the idea of financial economic instability.
Well, there's a lot of money moving around. We're seeing that people are trying to reposition themselves for what everybody expects to be a difficult year. Where does gold factor in? Should you stay in cash? Staying in cash is really tricky with the inflation the way it is. Go back into the stock market, look for values. Don't blame them for trying. Real estate, that's going to be really tough. I like real estate, but I just can't get a good handle on it. I think it's way overvalued in my opinion. We'll see how it factors out this year with the Fed continuing forward raising interest rates. What do you see?
I think as this continues, we'll see some understanding of at least at the moment, what Jerome Powell is trying to do with the U.S. dollar. Now, what will be, to me, the big shift that's going to be the most painful to the average American is when the Federal Reserve also cuts back its spending as well as its interest rate rises.
You mean their balance sheet?
Yep. When we see the balance sheet get cuts, I think, me personally, I think that's kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I think Jerome Powell knows that as well, because that's a huge piece.
Yes, it is.
And it's pulling money out of Congress's pockets. It's limiting their credit card spending going forward.
It's a black hole,
And we haven't seen it yet.
No.
And that's a big, maybe bigger piece of the spending coming through the Federal Reserve Bank. So I think we're seeing a lot of this seconded in the slightly less bottom of the triangle preservative metals and slightly more industrial and investment grade metals like, say, silver and platinum. Yeah. Silver did finish the year up slightly despite the monstrous gains in the value of the U.S. dollar, showing incredible strength for silver. And platinum was up like 6 or 7% on top of that. So you factor in the move in the U.S. dollar, you're talking about platinum and purchasing power up over 20% in a year. That's enormous. So we are seeing the U.S. dollar slip back down. It obviously would have been even higher if the dollar was still up at the levels it was a couple months ago. But like everything else, you're going to have some volatility there as well, even though they've continued to raise interest rates. So I still think we're at the reaction phase of the market, and I still think there's a little bit of greed floating around. I don't think the general public has shifted to a fear mindset yet, but I completely agree with you. I think that people are starting to wake up and realize 2023 might be a rough year.
Yeah.
What are some things you think we can actually look forward to?
I think we can look forward to the fact that information is being freed up. Parents are becoming more involved with their children's education now. I think there is a move for people to get their financial houses in order. I do think people are trying to be a little more frugal going ahead. Americans are an amazing people. When Americans' backs are against the wall, there's nobody like us in the world. We've shown this time and time again over the last few decades. And I think as their vision is becoming clearer as to what is actually going on around them, we are the greatest nation in the history of the world. And I hope that we can continue to look forward with optimism. I think these problems can be solved, but first they have to be recognized.
I think that's a great point, and I like what you said a second ago, because I've always sort of felt that as humans, we tend to strive for repetition and stability.
Right.
But we're also incredibly adaptive.
Yes.
And I have no doubt that as we're possibly shifting to maybe a new paradigm of how life works for a few years, like we have in the past. I mean, this isn't the first time that people have struggled their way through rough situations.
No.
Financially and economically is one of the probably least painful ways to struggle. But it can lead to much more horrific things as well. But we're incredibly adaptive. And that's the thing I'm hopeful for.
And you're seeing a lot of generosity, too. I mean, there's been a lot more outpouring to those in need and people in their community. I mean, people really are pulling up their shirt sleeves and getting to work and looking where they can help. Hard times, when Dickens wrote that classic line in The Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. I've always taken it to mean, in my little world of meaning, that hardship brings out the best in the good folks and the worst in the bad folks. But overwhelmingly, based on my experience in law enforcement, 90% of the people in America are good law-abiding citizens. It's the other 10% that you have to worry about, and it's probably not even that high. And I don't care which community you're a member of, which ethnic or religious community you're a part of, it's true across the board. But you just don't sharpen a knife on a stick of butter.
And since we're mentioning books, I'm also going to bring up one that you and Kevin and some of the guys made me read about 15 years ago, and that's deep survival. And just a healthy reminder to me that the people who tend to make their way through incredibly difficult and traumatic experiences are the ones who spend most of their time keeping everyone else alive.
Yeah.
There is something to be said for just accepting the reality that things ebb and flow.
They do.
And things are volatile up and down. Jerome Powell, I talk about him a lot, but that's because he's probably in the most important position on the planet right now. Mm-hmm. And that's directing the Federal Reserve Bank through what is unquestionably a recession, despite what the White House would like you to believe, and very likely and arguably a depression, despite what the White House wants you to believe. Jerome Powell is somebody that we're going to have to keep an eye on, as well as how other government leaders are ruling their own people. And I think COVID response and what we're now learning about how that was handled are very important going forward as well. So I'd just like to see people look for opportunities to better their community around them and get into a position that protects their family and the people closest to them. And I think that we're going to come out of this on the other side just fine.
We will. We always have.
So I think today, despite our concerns for what we're going to see throughout 2023, our expectation of the value of the U.S. dollar, our expectation for the equities market going forward, real estate, like you mentioned earlier, and internationally, I think there are things that you can be optimistic about in 2023, especially if you're somebody who tries to follow an organized, logical approach to how to manage your assets and bringing in things like precious metals, which, as we've seen, maintain purchasing power, as is their expectation going forward. So, as always, we encourage you to sit down and talk with one of your advisors at McIlvaney Precious Metals, with Rob or myself or any of the other guys here. Talk through your portfolio, your future expectations, how you want your assets preserved going forward. And you can do that by giving us a quick call. We can be reached at 800-525-9556. You can also find more info on our website at McIlvaney.com. We're on Twitter, ICA Gold, or on Facebook at McIlvaney Financial. Thanks for listening and have a great week.